here's this evidence that says that when you bash your head into something, there's a protein that gets released in your brain that cannot be undone, and it creates all these horrible effects in your life.
I couldn't tell you how many times I got my bell rung. Whether they be minor concussions or initial helmet contact, I was always very vulnerable to getting my head hurt. I played running back and defensive end, so there wasn't a play where my head was not involved.
The worst injury that I had as a football player was in high school football. It was during practice, and we had a drill where the players would line up about 10 yards away from each other, head on, and you were supposed to run through the other guy. I still don't understand to this day why we were doing that drill. It just seems insane. And I always happened to go up against a guy who was much bigger than me. And so my mentality was, I gotta try and run right through this guy. And I did that, and that's about the last thing I remember. I woke up in the hospital that night, and I'm not even sure if I suffered a concussion or what the diagnosis was, but I just remember thinking how afraid I was to go to sleep that night for fear that I wouldn't wake up. And it's at that time that I decided that I would not be playing football anymore, that it just didn't make any sense.
Well, probably the most significant injury for me dealt with a narrowing of the spinal column, and the way the game used to be played was a lot of shoulder and head contact, and I would suffer daily. I would suffer stingers, and eventually had been determined that I was at risk for potentially permanent paralysis. Could happen at any time. And it ended up, after consultation with family and consultation with the head trainer, that just seemed appropriate to no longer play.
So there are three different types of stingers. There's a stinger that involves the brachial plexus, which is where the nerves are coming into the arm. Then there's a stinger that involves the cervical roots, which is right where the nerves are that are coming out of the neck before they get into the brachial plexus. And then the third type of stinger is actually where the cord itself is contused.
It wasn't really something that was in my control. I'm not sure if the game was different then like it is today. Would it have had a positive impact on me? It would allow me maybe to play longer. And I think to this day, I still suffer some of the physical ramifications of the way the game was played then, including neck pain, shoulder pain, that kind of thing. So something you have to live with for a long time and can have significant impacts on quality of life.
Hi, my name is Chris Brown. I've been playing football here at the university for 4 years, and I'm a quarterback. You know, I've seen a handful of concussions. It's just part of the game. And, high school and college, they're pretty common. And, I mean, one specific one I can think of off the top of my head would just be my sophomore year. Starting QB, he got hit in the head and he was knocked unconscious. And yeah, I mean, it's always kind of frightening just seeing them kind of laying there unconscious, not responsive, and then there's that moment when they snap out of it.
I remember in high school there was one guy on my team who was a running back and a defensive end. And I guess one game I wasn't aware because it wasn't like a hit where he was out cold or anything. But it was just I saw the athletic trainer that kind of looking at his eyes and stuff on the sideline. And then he was back in the game and he was the running, pretty good runs. Then it wasn't until after the game when he was asking everyone but what happened? You know, I don't remember anything. Then that was my first-hand experience of someone having like a severe concussion. Then his case, that he was able to function and actually still play, but he had no recollection, no memory of what was going on.
After interviewing some players and coaches, I thought it would be helpful to gain a vantage point from the neurology department at the University of Montana.
You know, the medical field understand, you know, the dangers pretty well, but we all kind of feel like that work in the field, like a lot more information is needed out in the community. You know, a lot of people hear about concussion or have a child or family member or something that has a concussion, but they are not sure what it means, what to do afterwards, you know, how long it might take, what kind of help there might be. So, you know, we feel like education is really critical.
There was a study done out of Baltimore, published about 3 years ago, that looked at people who passed the impact exam, which is a standardized test developed out of Pittsburgh. And they found that most athletes who passed that failed the more rigorous exam. And so as a result, I think it's safe to say that we don't know that much about concussion.
Because I've endured multiple concussions, I took it upon myself to be screened for brain injury through the Neural Injury Center at the U of M by physiatrist Bill Rosen. After multiple tests assessing strength, balance, and eye coordination, Dr. Rosen found that the left side of my body is weaker than my right as a result of the stingers that I had playing football.
Then we did a motor exam and we found real ratchety type recruitment in the left arm and a little bit of weakness in the left shoulder, but otherwise the left arm was strong.
It hadn't occurred to me, but the concussions I had correlate to why I deal with mental illness.
They passed Dylan Steiger's Act here in Montana, which really changed the way that sports work out in the field. You know, if someone gets hurt, then there's this, by law, protocol that's supposed to happen. So it's better than it was. Sometimes I think that players and some coaches, you know, depending on their levels, they don't understand the dangers of maybe repeated concussion, and so that the danger is really exacerbated by putting someone back in too soon.
CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is a progressive neurological disease. It is under the umbrella of dementia, so it fits under the umbrella along with things like frontotemporal dementia or even Alzheimer's disease. The etiology is repeated concussions, repeated hits to the head, repeated mild traumatic brain injuries, and it manifests in a number of ways. So there are behavioral changes. As I mentioned before, there are changes in increased aggression, increased confusion. There are changes in cognition, so people have trouble with memory, especially short-term memory and attention. This is one that's interesting. CTE is interesting because there's oftentimes an earlier onset. So with many things under the dementia umbrella, we're thinking onset in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. With CTE, in theory, there's an onset much earlier in life.
You know what those Guardian caps are? I think those are a good step in the right direction, at least for practice, just so that you're not getting concussions in practice and whatnot. But as far as like things other than concussions go, it's really hard because it's a contact sport. Guys are getting hit, people are getting, you know, rolled up on and whatnot, and it's difficult to preserve, you know, ankle, knee, shoulder, those kind of things.
I think it's important to acknowledge that we're learning way more about, one, how that happens, two, how to prevent it as best we can, how to early diagnose it when it does happen so it doesn't become traumatic, right? From the standpoint of a person gets a concussion, it's usually the second or the third that's usually the most damaging. So we're learning so much more, and the game is changing. And as we continue to do that, I think you're going to find that more and more kids and more people can enjoy sports in general. And I don't think we want fear to be the thing that drives our choices. I think we want education.
Feeling like I'm falling, I've been getting uptight, staring at the ceiling, trying to get it just right. You know what's on my mind, 'cause I can't look you in the eye. I'm getting on the freeway, underneath the night sky. I'm a little wallflower singing one headlight. Yo, I'm looking for a sign. Superstition make me blind.